Hey guys, John from Primeaux here, and today I want to talk about something that is perhaps the unsung hero of every knife, and that is the handle. So the knife handle is perhaps just as important as the blade because it's the part that actually connects you to the blade and helps you to better do the work. It's also a huge aesthetic aspect of the knife, so how it looks is really determined by the handle in many ways. And so let's get into it. Our Primeaux knife handles are uniquely ours. We spent several years going through over 1,300 different iterations, designing these first in physical form, just hand making each one, and then we moved that into the digital space where we designed them in CAD programs. Then we 3D printed them, we made adjustments, did everything we could to create the perfect handle. And now this is based upon a lot of different stuff. I love industrial design, I love old cars, old motorcycles. So I kind of took this little dip here from the doors in the old Corvettes from the 1950s. Also a huge Triumph motorcycle fan. So those tanks had a nice little knee dent in the side of the gas tank. So this is also reminiscent of that. I also am a big fan of Art Deco. So we've got some Art Deco influence in here as well. And so I want to get into a little more about how we achieved this design, what it took to get here, and what it's based upon. So let's check out some stuff. So I'm going to start off talking about perhaps what's one of the most classic knife handles that when someone mentions a chef's knife, this is usually what you think about. This is just a black acrylic, some sort of polymer for the handle. It's very hard, very brittle. It gets kind of slick when you get it oily or greasy in the kitchen. However, it's very durable, strong stuff. Pretty comfortable in the hand. It's a little bit blocky. And you can see that this handle does have a bit of a slope right here that does kind of help you move into that pinch grip position. And they also do something by pulling the handle down below the blade right here. And that kind of gives you a nice soft place to rest your hand. So, you know, it's not the worst, but it certainly could be improved upon. So moving further down the commercial knife line, this is another production piece here. You know, this is like something you get at any of your big box stores. And this one has an integral bolster forged into it, probably drop forged. And this also has a full tang handle, so you can see that the tang of the knife goes all the way around. So this is very common. A lot of people think that this makes the knife stronger, but really it's just making up for the fact that it's probably crappy steel and it needs that metal going all the way through it. It's probably crappy handle materials, so it needs something to really give it some good reinforcement. You can see that this blade has this little indentation for your hand here to kind of grab it like a hammer, like this. Not my favorite position to cut in. Typically, you know, for most kitchen work, I like to be up in a pinch grip position, and most chefs will agree that that is the correct way to hold a knife. So this isn't the most comfortable for that pinch grip position. It's not the worst. You can also see that this material, it's not balanced extremely well. It's not bad, but it sits about right there. Not bad, but again, I think we can do better. So moving on up the food chain of production knives, I have here a full metal WMF knife. This is made with some great Dama steel, awesome steel. This is a company out of Germany, and they kind of have a Sabatier style bolster here, based upon some of the French knives that are German knife. There's a lot of overlap there in the technology and in the history of knife making within these countries. And this knife has, like I said, the full metal handle. So there's some other brands like Global is a very common one. There's a few others that do this full metal construction, which is really nice, especially for a commercial knife where, you know, you don't want to have to worry about, anything getting into the handle, if you just want some very industrial, something like this is great. It does have a nice rounded choil area here at the bottom of the handle. I'm not a huge fan of these giant bolsters that go from the top of the knife to the heel. It kind of gets in the way of sharpening, and I also don't really love the way it feels when you're pinched up on the blade. It's not a terrible experience, but you have a really sharp edge right here on the edge of the bolster that kind of rubs your hand, as well as a very sharp spine on the knife. So it's very, very rigid, very square. So it's not the most comfortable knife, I wouldn't say. It's kind of heavy. It's got decent balance on it. Not great, but not bad. Not a bad knife, but again, you know, I think that we can do better than this. So this is another reason why I pushed forward and designed the Primeaux handle. So next up, we've got one of my old knives. This one is probably coming up on 10 years old. This is a full tang construction like I used to make them with carbon steel. You can see it's extremely rusted, patinaed. Cool knife. I learned a lot from making this knife. I've learned a lot from using this knife over the years. And this one has a Cocobolo full tang handle. And this is kind of one of my earlier knives that it's a little bit wider across the butt of the knife, which is not a bad thing. I feel like some of the other commercially made knives have a bit too thin of a handle, so that's kind of nice. And you can see how I did this little recess right here. That's just a really nice spot that I still feature on all my knives, where your hand just really locks up into there nicely. But, you know, you can see that this knife still is very forward balanced. It balances right there, just ahead of the bolster. Not terrible. Not a bad handle, if I do say so myself. But, you know, it took a lot of work to make these handles one-off, each being unique. And so really when I started making the Primeaux knives, I wanted to make a handle that was a little bit easier to process and a little more even consistent from knife to knife. Whereas when I was making the one-off pieces such as this, that was really hard to do. Next up, I got a nice little knife from Join or Die Knives in Virginia. Now, Join or Die is another small maker, much like us here at Primeaux. It's just a small team of guys that are putting together some really awesome kitchen knives. And I just want to bring this one forward to kind of talk about different types of handles and different unique materials that can be involved. So they have some really cool stuff like this mosaic pin, 2 mosaic pins on it. They've got some red and black liners that really pop nicely. Walnut bolster on it. Very nicely pointed. And you can see that it has this little notch right here. So it really lends itself more towards this kind of grip, more than the pinch grip that I prefer. But also it's very comfortable, great handle. But you can see how this is another spot where the makers really have an opportunity with the handle to set their knives apart. And so I think that Join or Die did a great job of having a very signature handle here. So here I've got another really old Hinkle knife. Now this came out of the bottom of the kitchen cabinet. I don't know where this knife came from or when it was last used, but I held on to it for some reason. Now this has an aluminum and a rubber handle, so I think they were trying to have something that was easy to grip and felt soft to grip. But it's kind of gross feeling after several years sitting around, so I don't really like it. You can also see that it's a cheap knife because it has a serrated blade. So knife companies, especially larger production companies, will use these serrated blades to kind of make up for the fact that their knives won't stay sharp. So, you know, Hinkle, you can do better. So next we're going to start moving into the world of Japanese knives. So this is where I take a lot of inspiration from. Actually, I love the hidden tang construction that Japanese knives use, where the handle is just one big solid mass. Now here I have a Hone Japan knife, and this one is not necessarily hidden tang. It kind of has a half tang that you can see goes through the handle, and the handle is split It's a wooden handle with some big, huge 1/4 inch or bigger rivets in it. And you can actually see where the knife it has separated from the handle just because, you know, this wood expands and contracts. And you can see some gapping that's occurring where the wood is shrinking away from the handle or away from the tang of the knife. It's not a bad little knife just for taking out camping or picnics or whatever, but it's not really comfortable. And I don't think that these are made to be comfortable necessarily. Very sharp corner right here in the heel that your hand hits on when you grab the knife. Very sharp across the spine as well. So it's not necessarily the most comfortable thing, but it'll get the job done in a pinch. Next up, I've got this little Suncraft knife. This is another Japanese knife that features a more traditional Japanese style handle, and they call that a wa style handle. It's W-A, and I'm not sure why, but that's what they're called. And typically, these knife handles are quite a bit larger than the tangs. So you'll usually have anywhere between an 1/8 and a 1/4 inch shoulder on either side of the blade with this style handle, which to me is not the most comfortable because you are hitting that edge with your hand. Typically these knives always have a bolster, which is this part right here. That is the part of the knife where the blade joins into the handle. And this transitionary part is usually made from a synthetic material or like a plastic or synthetic horn, or sometimes it's a actual horn, like water buffalo horn is very common for this component, as well as a brass or bronze fitting as well. But typically it's something that is not going to soak up moisture when you're cooking, and so they like to use a lot of synthetic materials for this part. This is an oval shaped handle. So it has a nice long oval that is going to help you keep the knife from rocking too far in your hand. Sometimes if the handle gets too round, it wants to roll around in your hand, and that's not good because you don't have as much control if the knife is trying to roll in your hand. So yeah, great little Suncraft knife. Super cool. I definitely took a lot of inspiration from these Japanese style handles when designing the Primeaux knife. Next up, I've got this little Nakiri here. And this is another Japanese knife. So this is a Japanese vegetable knife. And this one also features the oval shaped wa handle. And this has a black plastic bolster on it, which is, again, I was talking about the synthetic materials that prevent the handle from soaking up the juices as you're cooking. And so this is really nice to just kind of protect the handle. This one is not quite as large of a gap or overhang on the shoulders, just a slight bit. So I think that's a bit more comfortable. And you can easily grab this handle, this knife handle, in that pinch grip. Fits very nicely in your hand. The oval, again, keeps the knife from wanting to roll back and forth. But as much as I like these handles, I love the simplicity of them. I wish that they had a little more character. It's really hard to tell a lot of these Japanese knives from one another because the handles all kind of have the same personality. They usually use a light colored poplar or maple wood, sometimes birch, along with a black bolster. So there's not as much personality with these, but they're pretty cool. Next up here is another Japanese knife. This is a Yanigiba style or a Sujihiki style knife. These terms are kind of flipped around and used rather interchangeably. This one features I believe it looks like a birch wood handle, not much character in the wood, with a very thin brass wrapped bolster. Some small shoulders up here at the bolster that I'm not crazy about, but these knives were made to be basically just taken on and off of these handles. So that in the construction of a lot of these knives, the handles were almost thought of as disposable if need be. And I think that's great, but also to me, I don't want to have to be changing out my handle. I want the handle to be on there. I want it to be part of the knife, and I want it to be a permanent aspect of it. And I think that, to me, like I said before, the handle is just as important as the knife. So I wish that there was some more attention paid to those details in these old Japanese knives. But you can see that this is starting to get closer to our Primeaux design. You know, I was definitely inspired by these, especially with this bronze bolster. Next up, we've got the octagonal handle. So this is kind of the next most popular Japanese style handle. And so you can see it's an oval shape, but it has these 8 sides on it. So it's very blocky, very squared off. And this one features one of those water buffalo horn bolsters I was talking about before, and a birchwood handle as well. So I like these handles pretty well. It is a bit thicker around than some of the other Japanese handles that can be kind of small and round. And to me, a little bit thicker of a handle creates less strain on the hand because you don't have to quite grab it as tightly. And so it just causes less fatigue as you're using it. Great little handle. I like how these balance. They balance just ahead of the bolster. Very lightweight. Solid handle. I like the 2 different materials. I think it looks nice to kind of contrast some different materials here. Definitely another major influence in designing the Primeaux knife handle. All right, so now we've gone through a few of the different knife handles that exist in the world, and now I want to talk to you a little bit about our Primeaux handle. So you'll notice that every Primeaux knife has some very unique appointments that you can recognize from across the room. And the number one thing is our pinch grip bolster. So as I was saying before, the bolster is this part right here where the blade of the knife joins with the handle of the knife. And typically this is made out of a material that's not going to absorb a bunch of moisture and that's not going to get gross with time. And so something that I was taught when I worked in restaurants was that you should always hold your knife in a pinch grip fashion. So pretty much any chef out there is going to agree that in order to have proper knife control, you really need to be choked up on the knife and have it just right there at the blade. And then your handle is just kind of hanging out here at the back. And so I got really tired of seeing people grab their knife like this and try to cut it like they're cutting with a hammer. And so I invented the pinch grip bolster to kind of encourage you, or any knife user, to grab it right there. Your thumb fits perfectly in it, and your hand just gently slides right up into that perfect pinch grip. And so you have really nice control of the blade. And we do some things like we round the choil right here, so your hand isn't going to be rubbing against anything. It's nice and smooth. And we're also polishing around our spines so that it's all rounded over, so that your hand isn't going to get rubbed wrong from holding the blade right there. And so with our Primeaux handles, it didn't just happen overnight. This is something that happened over thousands of iterations, literally thousands. You know, I made hundreds and hundreds of custom one-of-a-kind knives, all by hand, and every time I was wanting to find a way to create a handle that felt more consistent, but also had unlimited possibilities. And so that's part of the reason why I came up with this handle that has these 2 different unique components that can be manufactured out of a number of different materials. So here's another one of my very, very old knives. This one is probably about 7, 8 years old at this point. And again, you can see kind of where the evolution of the Primeaux handle came from. I've always kind of done this little dip into the choil area at the back of the heel of the knife. And I've always believed that the spine should be rounded and that everywhere you grab the knife should be comfortable, no matter what. Some of these older handles are very chunky, very big. But again, this helps reduce a lot of the stress on your hand from having to grab a small handle. So this is another great example of how we got to the evolution of the Primeaux handle. So you can see these 2 knives. These are several years apart. And you can see I've always kind of done this swell of the handle where it starts off smaller here and it always rounds off the back. And that's because I really like how if you're holding the knife farther back, the butt of the knife just rests nicely in the palm of your hand. And so I think that's a really nice feeling. And I try to carry that style across all of my knife handles. Again, with this one, I used a synthetic bolster here. So this one is a rich light. And I've got some little pops of brass here as well. So I always think that black stuff on knives is classy. I always think that brass is classy. This one also has a walnut handle. And so you can see that this handle, even though it's several years old, it's held up extremely well. And that's because we stabilize all the woods on our handles. So wood stabilization is a process of essentially plasticizing the wood. And so we do this by first drying the wood extremely well. We get all the moisture out of it. And then we put into a special stabilizing resin and we submerge it into a vacuum chamber. And then we put a vacuum pump on it and suck all the air out. And this forces a special resin into the pores of the wood, very, very deep into the wood. And we let it sit in there for several weeks until it's just fully engulfed in this special resin. Then we take it, we put it in the oven, we bake it for about 12 hours at 200 degrees. And at that temperature, this resin starts to catalyze and expands in the pores of the wood. And essentially glues the wood together from the inside, and it fills all those spaces that moisture could get trapped in. So you don't have to worry as much about your knife handle expanding, contracting, and cracking off like a lot of old wood handles will do. Now, something that's really cool about the wood stabilization process is that we can also put colors into it. We're almost unlimited colors can go into that resin. And then when we sand and polish the handle after it's been made, all those colors just come to life. So another really cool thing about the Primeaux knife handle platform is that I can use a ton of different materials. And one of the materials that I love to use the most is this stuff. Now, this is called Fordite, and it is actually layers of paint. They're taken from the walls inside the car manufacturing facility where they spray the car bodies, and it's just one car after another, and there's lots of overspray going all over everything, and they're changing the colors a whole bunch, and over time that paint layers up into these very fine layers, and it sags and sinks on the walls and creates some really cool patterns inside the material. And so then I can take this material and I can laminate it up into bigger chunks and I can mill handles from it. And so here's a really neat example of a Primeaux handle that is made from this Fordite material. And so you can see that it has all kinds of cool colors and speckles from the metallic paints that are used, and cool drips and shapes that are all formed from the paint deforming as it sags down the wall. So I spent many years making all my knife handles one at a time, just sanding them, shaping them by hand, and it was a very cool, very sculptural experience, but they were never the same. Some were thick, some were thin, and not that I was limited, but it took a lot of time and a lot more effort than needed. And so at a certain point, I decided that we needed to find a new way to make these handles. And so one of my first thoughts was try 3D printing. So this is one of our very, very first 3D prints. This is a resin-based print. And it's just using a model resin, so it's just a gray resin. And we went through hundreds and hundreds of different versions, reprinting the knife handle after we designed it, and just kind of testing out different proportions, different lengths, different thicknesses, and then testing them with different blade styles to kind of see how that handle balanced both aesthetically and in a sort of a physical way. And we played lots of different resins. So this is a basic gray modeling resin, and this one came out really cool actually. It's another type of resin, but you can see some translucence to it. And so I sanded and polished this one after it was finished, and you can actually see the honeycomb structure inside of the handle. But unfortunately, we found that not all these resins were as stable as we wanted, and we didn't feel that these could work good for day-to-day use. So hopefully that technology catches up and we can use it again soon. But for right now, we're just sticking with 3D printed handles as prototypes. Here's an example of one of our very first 3D printed handles. And so you can see that this one has quite a bit of deformation in it. And that's just from uneven curing in the resin, which I guess is a thing. So once we decided what our final shape of the handle was going to be, what this bolster component was going to be like, and what this main handle was going to be like. Then we had to figure out a way to machine it. And so the goal with my Primeaux knife line is that we have kind of this semi-modular design platform that we can interchange various parts to create thousands of different kitchen knives. And so one of the first ways that we tried was just by taking blocks of wood like this and dropping them onto our CNC machine. So a CNC machine, in case you don't know, is a computer numerically controlled machine. And essentially this is a machine that my team and I built over several years, and we made it from scratch to serve one purpose for us, and that was just to make handles. So we started off by just trying to carve the handles from the CNC machine. And so we'd carve one side, then we'd flip it over, carve the other side, pop out the handle, and then sand them clean. But this ran into a lot of issues. It was hard to keep the handles perfectly even, so they weren't coming out perfectly symmetrical. And so we encountered a lot of different challenges. Eventually, we determined that what we need to do is add another axis to our machine. So typically on a CNC machine, you have an X, Y, and Z axis. But we need to add another one so that we can essentially turn an off-center handle. And so through this process, we're able to create a handle that is not perfectly round, so it has some squareness to it. However, it has some nice roundness to it so that it fits nicely into your hand. It has a nice swell to it so that you have a smaller grip at the front and it gets bigger as it sits in the back of your palm. And we're also able to create a multitude of handle designs from this one process, made from a multitude of different materials. And so, yeah, we developed that fifth axis and got a little bit closer. Fast forward a few more years and we've got our CNC process pretty well dialed in on the knife handle production. And so now we're able to create a bunch of cool handles. So this is just one that features some different types of wood. We've got some ambonia burl, we've got some walnut, and this one has an anodized aluminum bolster. So you can see with our platform, we're able to have different sizes. So this is a paring knife handle, for instance, whereas this is our larger handle that is used on, say, a chef's knife. We started out 3D printing. So we developed all this stuff through 3D printing. And when it came time to develop the bolster further, we decided 3D printing was also the way that we should explore this. But instead of using the 3D prints as our finished product, we started using the 3D prints as a medium to cast with. So we started off doing lost wax casting with 3D prints. So this is what a 3D printed wax bolster looks like before casting. And this is what a few of them look like after casting. So this is solid bronze. And basically what we were doing was printing all this form in a wax resin. And we would take that wax resin and we would put it into a thing called an investment. And this is basically like a porcelain clay plaster kind of stuff. And we would submerge the 3D print into that. And then we would put it into the kiln and bake away this 3D print. And so what we were left with was just a shell that we could then pour molten brass or bronze or aluminum or whatever we want into the mold, and we'd get these little trees with a few different bolsters. Now the problem with this was that sometimes we would get 4 or 5 good ones, sometimes we get no good ones. These took about 24 hours to print, and then it took all day to do a casting. It took about 24 hours to do a burnout cycle to get rid of the 3D print. So it's very time intensive, very energy intensive. And then it was always a gamble as to if these were actually going to come out. So finally, after lots of trial and error, we finally found a machinist that was willing to work with us to help us use a 5-axis mill to carve these bolsters out. And so now each bolster will thread nicely into any of our handle components. So with our Primeaux handle platform, we're able to combine a whole bunch of different materials. So this is an anodized aluminum with a yellow anodized aluminum with a purple bolster. We can get as crazy as we want around here. Here's a blue and a pink one. Here's a solid black one. So it's basically the same finish as Maglites have. You know, a lot of car and truck parts have this anodized finish, so it's super durable, industrial stuff. Very cool. With the platform, we're also able to use things like G10. Now, G10 is an electrical insulator, and this is a super popular material for a lot of EDC knives. It's everyday carry knives. It's very, very durable, and it looks really cool. It looks just like jade stone, feels like jade stone, and we do a special bead blast finish on it, so it just feels really nice in the hand. It's kind of a matte finish. It's not slick at all, just a little bit grippy. Super tough, great for commercial kitchens, or if you just want to have that kind of stone look on your knife handles for your home, it's a really great option. Here's another great one. This is a tuya burl with a bronze bolster. And so tuya burl is a Moroccan cedar wood, and it's just one example of some of the exotic woods that we work with here at Primeaux. So as we continue to explore with the options of Primeaux handles, this is one that is injection molding. So in the future, I would love to be able to do in-house injection molding with recycled plastics. So essentially we'd be able to take old Coke bottles and old milk jugs, melt those down and create our own recycled plastic handles, which I think would be really great for you know, a more production line of knives. One of our most unique handles that we have is our farmhouse ripple. This one's totally different than all of our other knives, and honestly, it's different than anything else I've seen in the market. When I first started making knives, I wanted to make things that felt very handmade. I was shopping around for knives, and nothing had much personality or much soul. And so I really set out to create a knife that had the feeling of a hand-thrown mug or a piece of pottery, something that's like truly unique, truly one of a kind. And so that's why we developed the farmhouse ripple. And so these handles are made the same process as our other handles, except we have a slightly different tool path and a slightly different bit selection here that creates these nice shallow ripples in the handle. Now this is still wood, but then we finish it with a milk paint, which is a sort of an old-fashioned type of paint. And then I buff everything off the high spots so it only sits in these low ridges. And it creates a really nice weathered, worn, rustic kind of handle. And I think it just pairs really beautifully with the bronze. And it feels great in the hand. It's very, very tactile. And it feels, yeah, just like a nice hand-thrown mug. It has personality to it. Every knife is gonna be different. And again, you know, that it just provides a little bit of grip, keeps the knife from slipping your hand, and your hand just really slides really nicely up into that pinch grip, and you feel really secure, just really nice. So if you haven't tried out our farmhouse ripple, I'd highly recommend getting your hands on one. So at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, with the Primeaux knife platform of handles and blades, you can go from something that's super rustic to something that's just super modern, very crisp, very elegant. So this is our same Zenith chef's knife, but with a polished blade and with this solid anodized aluminum handle. So this is something that's much more along the lines of, say, the Global knives or the WMF knives, as I showed previously, where it's just a very sort of industrial, modernist style blade. So as I was talking before about some of our very, very first knives, this is one of our first prototype knives of the Primeaux first edition blades that we released in 2022. And this one features one of our 3D printed bolsters. And so you can really see some of the imperfections in it. It's got a crack from the casting in it. You know, it doesn't fit up quite as well as our new fully machined bolsters, but it's a really cool look at how we got to where we are now. So this one is taking it to the next level as far as handles go. So this is probably our most intense handle we've done to date. And so this was actually for a drummer in a band. And we decided to match his drum shells to the handle. So something that's really cool about the Primeaux handle is that we have all the options in the world to create something as custom as you want to, and use some really unique, really special materials to make the knife truly one of a kind. All right, so I hope you learned a few things about knife handles, probably more than you ever wanted to know before. But like I said before, the knife handle is almost as important as the blade. It's where the human meets the tool, and that relationship is extremely, extremely important. And so everything that we've done to design the Primeaux knife handle has been extremely intentional, just like everything that we do. And I hope that you can get your hands on one. I hope you can try one out, and you'll see that these are by far the most comfortable knives that you've ever put your hands on, and they're some of the sharpest too.